I really thought last night was just fantastic. I hope you guys did too. A huge shout out to Dixie Crystals for the fun sugar scrubs. Florida Strawberry and St. Augustine Vodka for, or distillery, I should say, for those fantastic strawberry cocktails. I hope everyone enjoyed them. And also, of course, Rosen, Shingle Creek. I hope everyone that's staying with us enjoyed their little slipper, because that's really what it's all about, right? Making dreams come true. And with that being said, you know, we put so much thought into our keynotes and who's the right person to really kick off this conference and inspire all of you to take your blog to the next level, or to, you know, create your business and take that to the next level. And we went over it and kept on coming back to these two fantastic individuals who I just adore, and I know they have inspired me. Andrew Wilder and Monica Bhide. They are two amazing individuals with not only what they've done with their blog, their business, their writing, but really they speak to me as to exactly what we need to put it all together. And that is technology, and Andrew is the tech guru. As he said, he has been doing it since he was in kindergarten. He took his first design class. And writing, really that's what it's all about. And if any of you know Monica, you know she is a phenomenal writer. She's published, she's so inspirational. But more than that, these two individuals are so giving of their time to our entire community. I know that I could reach out anytime and they will give me great advice and really just help in any way that they can. And I feel that that's so important with this conference, because that's really what it's all about, coming together as a community, helping each other, you know, rising to the occasion and helping each other lift each other up. So that's really why they're here today. I'm really, really excited to have them. I'm just going to say one quick little note about the first time I met Monica, and then I'm going to turn it over to them. So a couple of years ago, I was asked to speak at the Cookbook Conference in New York City, and it was my first time speaking in public, and that's not an easy thing for me. And I was scared to death, to be honest with you. And I said yes, because I knew that I had to do it. And then when I realized who was on my panel, it was Amanda Hesser and Molly O'Neill. And we were speaking on the future of food writing. And I said to my husband, there's no way that I could do this. What could I possibly have to add that these two women that, you know, everyone knows, wonderful writers, what could I possibly have to add? And I was scared to death to go. And Ron looked at me and said, you're going. You are going on this trip and you will speak on this panel. And I think I prayed the whole way in the airplane that I would get up there and I'd be okay. And when I got up on that stand with these other phenomenal women, I looked out into the audience and there was someone just smiling at me and, you know, encouraging me. And that was Monica. And when I got off that stage, she was standing there and telling me what a great job I did. And, you know, that's what Monica is all about. So I know that you're really going to enjoy both of these guys. I couldn't imagine a better way to kick off our day, and I'm going to turn it over to them.
Well, thank you, Isabel, for bringing us all here together and for inviting me to speak this morning. I'm quite frankly thrilled and honored. This is my first time doing a keynote, and all I'm thinking in my head is stand up straight and talk slowly. So before we get started, I'm curious, just a quick show of hands, how many of you are new to blogging? Like new, like under a year, or feel new to blogging? Cool. And how many of you feel like you've been doing this forever? Okay. And everybody else, I'm going to guess, is somewhere in between or not at blogging. And for how many of you is this your first blogging conference? Awesome. And finally, my last question. How many of you started blogging as part of a career change? Cool. Okay, so the topic for this morning actually came about initially as a bit of a joke, which is how good ideas often do. When chatting with Renee about the schedule for the conference, she had repeatedly emphasized that the schedule was subject to change. She made a very big point of it. So it kind of turned into this running joke. And when Isabel, Renee, Monica, Christina, and I were all on a video conference, we were batting around topics for the session, and I kind of jokingly said, well, how about subject to change? And we all chuckled and then kind of realized, wait a minute, that's perfect. So much about being a blogger involves change. We all have to adapt and overcome changes on what seem like a daily basis. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and how I ended up here. I wear a lot of hats. First, I have a food blog called Eating Rules, where my philosophy is that healthy eating doesn't have to suck. Then I also have a tech support and training business for bloggers called Blog Tutor, and I'm the founder of an advertising network called Healthy Ads. It sounds like I'm all over the place, and in some ways it is, or I am, but it all ties together, I promise. So let's go back to when I was in 9th grade. I got involved in both the animal rights and the environmental activist groups at school, and I became really interested in how what I ate affected me and the animals and the planet. And I stopped eating meat at that point. This was, of course, to my mother's great dismay. She insisted that she wouldn't cook anything special for me, so if I wanted something else for dinner, I'd have to cook it myself. That's what got me started cooking, and at least the way I like to tell the story, my cooking was so good that soon everybody in the family was eating what I was making. I was also the theater tech guy. You know, there's always one, like the one guy who like the librarian pulls out of class to help with the presentation. That was me. And by the time I graduated high school, not really knowing what else I wanted to do, I decided to go to college and study theater. I then spent the next 10 years or so after that working as a lighting designer for live events. A good chunk of my time was spent on board cruise ships, designing the lights for the shows. And if you've ever seen a show on a princess ship, that was probably my work. Over time, I became less and less enamored with lighting. It was a tough life physically, with long hours and lots of travel. And the cruise ship thing was a lot of fun for a while, but then it kind of crushed my soul. It wasn't really aligned with my values. So in 2008, I finally decided to leave that career entirely. That was a tough transition for me. So much of my identity was wrapped up in being the lighting designer, but it was time to move on. I'd been doing some web design as a side gig that whole time, so I ramped up my work there, and I used that to get by while I figured out what the next chapter would be. And through all those years on the road, I hadn't been taking care of my body. I wasn't eating well. I was pretty much a junk food vegetarian. And my weight had sort of crept up without my realizing it, or I should say without my admitting it. So here I was towards the end of 2008, 30 pounds overweight, told by my doctor I was pre-diabetic, having given up a fairly successful career, and oh yeah, my relationship of 4 years had just ended as well. A few months later, in early 2009, I was walking through a parking lot. It was perfectly flat ground, and I felt like I was walking through molasses. I was 32 years old, and I knew this just wasn't right. My body was basically angry at me. This was my aha moment. It was a metaphorical door that had just appeared in front of me, and I realized it was time to go through it. So I decided to try yoga. And after a few sessions, following along to videos in my living room where nobody could see me fall over, I started to feel a bit better. And then I started to pay more attention to what I was eating, and I started tracking my calories. I actually started jotting down how much I was eating on little Post-it notes, and by the end of the day, my kitchen was cluttered with little yellow squares. And I realized there's an app for that. So if you're interested in tracking your calories, check out the Lose It app. It's awesome. So I was on this journey of exercise and food discovery, basically, or rediscovery. And I picked up a few books at that time. One of them was The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. I enjoyed it so much that I read his follow-up, In Defense of Food. And that's the one where he summed up so perfectly, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That helped me realize just how much processed food I was still eating. Then a simple idea came to me to see if I could avoid all processed food for an entire month. This was still before I had my blog, so I was just doing my thing, right? And so I just posted a bit on Facebook, kind of a rant, about processed foods, and I tagged about 30 friends to see if anybody would sort of be interested in trying to get rid of processed food. So I had this whole rant about, like, maybe I can go for no processed food for 30 days, who wants to join me? Thankfully, 2 of my friends did. We spent the month cooking together, hanging out, and figuring out how to go unprocessed. By the end of that month, we all felt better, and we had become better friends too. At this point, I had become so passionate about healthy eating that I just wouldn't shut up about it. So I decided to listen to the old advice of follow your passion and the money will come. That's what prompted me to start Eating Rules the following spring. At that point, I had no idea about the blogging community. It had never even occurred to me that there might be something like a blogging conference. But a few months later, I somehow found out about the International Food Bloggers Conference in Seattle. And I decided if I was really serious about this blogging thing, I needed to walk through this next doorway. I didn't know anybody at all, but everyone was incredibly warm and it was easy to make friends. And since I had just shelled out a whole lot of money for the conference and the airfare and the hotel, I was determined to make the most of it. One of the things I did was give myself a homework assignment. To me, my homework assignment was to meet at least 3 new people during each of the breaks between sessions. It was actually pretty funny. I'd introduce myself to someone, we'd chat for a couple of minutes, and then I'd excuse myself to go meet somebody else and explain this is my homework assignment, and we'd have a good laugh about it. That weekend, I met some of my now closest and dearest friends. That weekend also helped spark the October Unprocessed Challenge. I had done 30 days of Unprocessed before, but this time I wanted to incorporate it into my blog somehow. So I sent out a tweet with the conference hashtag saying, I'm thinking about making October a month of no processed foods. Who wants to join me? Within just a few seconds, I literally had 10 people respond, I'm in. I couldn't believe the outpouring of support and interest. So I set up a little pledge page on my blog, and I asked all of those new friends to write guest posts about unprocessed food. I didn't really know what I was doing, but everyone was so supportive and enthusiastic, I knew I had to be onto something good. By the end of that month, 415 people had signed the pledge. That totally blew my mind. It was an incredible response, especially for a little blog that this guy just started writing that was only 6 months old. October Unprocessed has continued to grow each year since then, and last year more than 22,000 people took the pledge. And if any of you are interested in writing a guest post for this October, let me know. So after IFBC, I was hooked on this blogging thing, not just because of blogging, but because of bloggers. I realized how incredibly lucky I am, how lucky we are to have found this community. It's rare for someone to be a part of even one amazing community in their lifetime, and now I had just left one, the theater, and was blessed to find another. So that's Eating Rules. What happened next was that Erica Karekash, who's right over there, the genius creator of not ketchup dipping sauces, I'm going to give her a shout out, she asked me to speak about Google Analytics at the Food Bloggers Los Angeles meetup. Erica just opened up another door for me. I spent a couple of hours with the crew going through the intricacies of all the analytics stuff, and afterwards people swarmed me with technical questions and pleas for help on their websites. Someone asked me what I would charge to fix something on her site, and I told her I wouldn't charge anything. She insisted. That's when I realized I was onto something else. So I decided to run through that next door and hang out a Shingle as the blog tutor. Business has been, in a word, overwhelming. So then there's healthy ads. That came out of a desire to monetize Eating Rules. But I looked at the existing ad networks and realized none of them were a good fit since I didn't want ads for junk food on my site. I tried some direct sales, working directly with an advertiser, but my traffic wasn't high enough to justify all the work and all the 2 weeks of back and forth and the billing. It just didn't really scale. Then I talked with a few other health bloggers, and they expressed a similar frustration. So you guessed it, another doorway, Healthy Ads, was born. Through all of this, I've realized 3 things about myself and what I need to stay happy and energized. First, I have to be learning. Second, I have to be challenged. And third, I have to be doing good with a capital G. I tell you that just as an example of self-reflection. I figured out that these 3 things are a large part of what drives me and what gets me out of bed in the morning. In fact, I use the get out of bed in the morning test to know if I'm on the right track. If I'm excited to get out of bed to work on whatever it is I'm working on, or conversely, if I'm working late and not quite ready to go to bed, then I know it's the right thing for me to be doing. And if I wake up in the morning dreading the day ahead, and if I do that for too many days in a row, then I know it's time for another change. Not every day is perfect, of course, but it's a great way to check in and be aware of what's really going on. And just to be clear, I was very excited to get out of bed this morning. This week, as I've been thinking about what I wanted to say today, I happened upon a quote from Steve Jobs. I feel like it's really cliche to quote Steve, but since I didn't go looking for this quote, it found me. I feel like that gives me a pass. He said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference." So with all that said, I want to give you a challenge. This is for everyone, whether you're new to blogging or if you've been at this forever. It's really simple. Make the absolute most of this weekend that you can. Hang out with your friends, sure, but then go meet 3 awesome new people during the break. Then stay up late chatting with these new friends. Post, tweet, Instagram your heart out using the hashtag. Change seats between sessions. Be the first to arrive and the last to leave. Drink a ton of water. And if you need to skip a session and go hang out at the pool, if that's what you need to do, who knows who you're going to meet and what connection is going to be made there. Make lots of dots and run through lots of doorways. You never know what all those dots and doors will lead you to, but I promise it'll be something great. Thank you.
Good job. I just wanted to publicly announce that he lied to me. He said, oh, I'm just going to go up there and talk. I've got nothing written down. Everything's going to be You know? So I actually wrote something down, so there. Thank you, Isabel, for having me. I really appreciate it. Hi to all my buddies. I was here last year. I see a lot of familiar faces. And my buddies who are waving to me know that I know very few jokes, and I keep repeating them, so just laugh, please. Oh, and one more thing, one very important thing before I start to talk a little bit about subject to change. I have a new intern. It's my 16-year-old son, and he's monitoring my Twitter feed, so be nice. Like, please, just for this morning, then you can say whatever you want, because he'll be off doing something else. So, I wanted to talk about how I got here and what I'm doing here, because my journey is very different from yours. Although I think sometimes the destinations are very similar. I grew up in India and the Middle East, and for someone like me growing up at that time, career choices were very limited. You know, you could either be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or as my mother said, marry rich. Those were the options. There wasn't much else. I wanted to write, but the question was, you want to write? But how are you going to make a living? You can't make a living doing arty, crafty things. You need a real degree. So I got one. I'm an engineer with dual masters. One of them is in artificial intelligence. And I began to work for corporate America, and I did so for 13 years. And I remember going into work every day. I never hated my job, you know? I never hated it. I met lots of good people, but every morning, it's like something in me was dying. I never got out of bed and said, woohoo, leadership training, let's go! It just, you know, it wasn't happening. And I was telling Andrew this morning, there was a guy that I worked for who, God, don't tweet this, calling me at my desk. This is 1998, right? Calling me at my desk. Monica, I'm trying to print something and I can't print it, and you're supposed to be my technical person, and what's going on? And I was like, but what are you doing? Well, I'm trying to print this presentation, can't print it, what's going on? Where are you? Well, I'm on a plane going to Hawaii. There was no Wi-Fi back then. Like, no, you can't print from a plane going to Hawaii. But it wasn't working. You know, we used to call the job the golden handcuffs. It was a lot of money, 6 figures, but I didn't have a life. I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. So of course, then I did what any engineer would do when they quit a job cold turkey. I went and wrote my own obituary. What did I want to be known as? You know, time passes fast. I had a friend who died very suddenly at the same time. She was the same age as I was. We had little kids. She was 35 years old, and she was rollerblading. She fell on the sidewalk. People survive plane crashes, you know? Really made me think, what did I want to be known as? So I started writing this little obituary about, you know, wanting to tell stories, wanting to connect with people, wanting to inspire people. But that's not really a job description. You know, so how do you do this? So I thought, well, I'm an engineer. I can figure this out. I want to be a writer. How hard is it going to be to write for magazines? Let's start with the magazines. Okay. So I started writing for magazines. One big national magazine said, oh, you know, I like your voice. Why don't you tell me what you really want to do? And I said, well, I want to go to Dubai. I want to talk about the food culture of this place that no one knows about. This is 10 years ago. They sent me to Dubai. I came back. I submitted my story. And she's like, wow, this is really good. And I thought, I got it made. It's happening, you know? Then they called back, and they were like, oh, my God, the big gun at the magazine loves your story. She's sending a photographer now to Dubai. So give us all your places that you went, and they're going to do this. So by now, this is going to be like a $50,000 project. It's not cheap traveling to Dubai and taking pictures of all these places. By the way, the writer gets paid the least out of that $50,000, just in case you're wondering. So we come back, everything's done. It's January. The story is set to go for the March issue. 2 days before publication, life is subject to change. I get a call from them and they say, you know, there's this really famous writer who just wrote a book about Dubai, so we think we're going to include his story and not yours. See ya. Okay, no, I'm a big girl, I can do this. They had also assigned me another story, which was following a chef around for a year to see how he took his restaurant from 3 stars to 4 stars and really made a name for himself. And I thought, okay, that's a book deal there, right? If I do this, I'm going to get a book deal. And they're like, yes, absolutely. Don't worry about that Dubai story. That was just 10 days of your life. I spent 1 year in this guy's kitchen with all the cussing and this and that. And, you know, my husband, my kids are mad at me because I'm going there at 2 o'clock in the morning because if you ever worked in a restaurant, that's when all the real drama happens. Finished everything, a year goes by, I file my story, the guy doesn't get 4 stars, and my story gets killed. Subject to change. Every single thing. So this is going on for years, and then the dream happens, right? Oprah magazine calls. We want to feature you, we love your stuff. And I thought, okay, this is it. Finally, I've left that 6-figure job. The first year I earned $5,000 as a writer, and somebody said, wow, that's really good money. The hell did I just do? So the Oprah team, as wonderful as they are, sent a photographer, they sent a makeup person, they sent, you know, pans and pots that I'd never heard of. They went to Nordstrom's and bought all these beautiful platters, and I thought, this is it. This is it. This is career change. They took these pictures. They were gorgeous. Yeah, same story. Got killed. Move on. Another subject to change story, but I'm going to come back to that one. So by now, according to common wisdom, if you wanted to be a writer, you needed bylines, right? You needed to write for the big names. So I had the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and I thought, I've got enough to go and say, let's see if I can write a book. So I put together a book proposal. I'm known for storytelling, so the book had recipes and essays. 2 days after the book proposal went out, 2 days, the agent called and said, they don't want the essays. Take everything out. It's just a recipe book. Okay, I can do that. I'm flexible. Took out everything, put it. 2 days later, he calls. Simon & Schuster wants the book, but they're wondering, where is your voice? Why are there no essays in this book? Okay, I'm not making this up. Okay, book deals are on the table. Select which one you want. There were several companies. Simon & Schuster I loved because the editor had been there for 23 years, a very strong editor who had edited Bittman and some really big names, and I thought, you know, I'm going to do this with her. She's amazing. She's behind this. She loves my voice. She asked for my essays when everybody else said, no essays, only recipes. So we get on the phone, and Sydney's like, oh my God, you know, we got your proposal, and the reason I selected it is because we sent the proposal out to the interns. And they cooked the recipes, and they liked the recipes. So if the interns like the recipes, you're in. If you take nothing away from this talk, take that. So be nice to the interns. That was for my son, in case anybody missed. Okay. So fine, we write the book. Everything's going rah-rah. I'm ready. I send the book in. Nothing. Send a follow-up. Nothing. I'm like, okay, what's going on? You're not going to kill this project, too. Like, by this time, I'm like, every single thing I touch just kind of dies. So what happened? My agent calls, and he goes, are you sitting down? Yes. After 23 years at Simon & Schuster, the cookbook editor who bought my book left the week the book came out. Life is subject to change. It's a pain in the what, let me tell you. But you try to sort of move with the times. Okay, so now, you know, you have a book. What happens if you have a book? You go on a media tour. And I've never been on TV. So they're like, you know, come to Toronto. We'll get you, because it's easier to get new people on there. Come to Toronto. So we spend all this money. We go to Toronto, get up on stage. I'm a home cook who had never used a cutting board, because I cut like an Italian grandmother. I hold it in my hand and I slice. And the guy looked at me and he said, I can't put you on like that. You know, we'll get sued. Like, people will try this and slit their fingers. So I'm like, no. I'm very flexible. Get me a board. I can do this. And I'm like standing there with the board ready to go. And all of a sudden the cameras are turning and I'm like, got my slim side, you know. Yeah, 30. Everything's going perfectly. And they're like, and now we're going to Zoom too. Cut, there's a plane crash in New York. It was fine. It was one of those little commuter things. Nobody died, except my segment died on the spot. We couldn't afford to go back again. Because there are food stylists here who will tell you it costs about $2,000 to create that lovely, very natural-looking set in front of you that has, 4 apples and 2 oranges. Very expensive. Very expensive mistake. So now here I am, book deal, some media exposure, not a little bit. Trying to figure out where I'm going next, what do I want to do? And I get a call from one of the newspapers that I've been writing for forever, and they said, do you have a blog? Wait, what? Do you have a blog? And I'm like, well, I have a website where I park my stuff. No, we need a blog. And we need you to come and blog for us for a year. So I'm like, okay, I can learn this skill. It's not that hard. It's just like writing a column every day, right? So I can do this. 2 weeks later, have you heard of Twitter? Are you on Facebook? What are your numbers? And I'm dying, because here I am. I left a job of numbers, but here I am back to being quantified again by how many people are following me, liking me, unliking me, unfollowing me, unfriending me, friending me again, sending me nice notes, nasty notes, and it's become all about that persona. And I found myself getting lost. The 2 kickers came. One, I was in Washington, D.C. meeting with a magazine editor, someone I really, really, really admire. We're sitting down, we're having this great discussion about the story that I want to do. I wanted to go to Mumbai and talk about a food culture that was dying, expanding. I was so excited. And she was like, absolutely. She said, I just have one question for you. And I said, what's that? And she said, what is your clout score? What the fuck is a clout score? Luckily, I had a phone that worked, so I'm like, excuse me, ran to the restroom, pulled it up, oh, clout score. Oh, came back, oh, I've got a clout score. Let's you and me talk about my clout score, because now what had happened was, before you wrote for a magazine, they sent a photographer who photographed it, came back, your story ran. Now you want to go write for the big magazines and newspapers, you need a clout score, but you also need to take your own pictures, you need to say where you're going to tweet, how you're going to tweet, who you're going to tweet. None of this existed. It had completely sort of changed who I was and what I was doing with my time. Right around then, my son, little one, was in 1st grade. And the kids are asked to describe what their parents do for a living? You know where this is going. He came home, Mom, look, I wrote this paper about the family. And I was like, yeah? And he said, look what I wrote about you. And I read it. My mom writes on Facebook. That was the job description. Man, these little kids, I tell you, you gotta love them. So I read that, and it really shook me, I have to tell you, because it's like, wait a minute, where was I going with this whole storyteller thing? I left this job that was paying all my bills, and somehow I got into everything being about the numbers. Not that there's anything wrong with that, right? But there's a time and place for everything. But if you get lost in the sea of numbers and checking the website stats and your Amazon reviews and this and that, you sort of lose who you are in all of that. And they always say, the teacher appears when the student is ready, and I needed a lesson, what my husband calls basically a major kick in the ass. I was in India, this is about 2 years ago, and one of the things we try to do is, they're very poor parts of the country, and instead of celebrating birthdays with cakes and champagne, we try to go and volunteer and do a little something nice. My son and I share a birthday, my 16-year-old. So we went to this place where this guy had left his job from a very big, well-paying company in the US, and he had come to India to say, my sole job is to take beggars off the street, right? Just going to bring them in here, I'm going to feed them, I'm going to provide free medical care. His facility was possibly the most horrendous thing I had ever seen in my life. It was some rich guy's backyard, okay? So there's the mansion, which is $6 million, and in the back, there's like 10 acres of tents that are leaking, and there are people sitting there, and he's trying to feed them. And he said he takes the society's most unwanted people and tries to rehabilitate them. I'm like, okay. So we go in, we're trying to feed them, we're trying to give them food. And this one gentleman comes up to me. You wouldn't believe this. He was much older, maybe in his 70s, wearing just a long white shirt and brown pants, and he comes down and sits next to me. I'm assuming he's one of the beggars. He starts speaking to me in the most perfect, beautiful Oxford English I have ever heard. I'm like, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I was a judge in the High Court in London. You're a writer, right? And I said, yes. He said, have you heard of Salman Rushdie? And I said, yes. He said, he was my classmate. And what are you doing here? He said, well, when I came back to India, got into some trouble with the family. This is like a movie. They added some stuff to his food, became homeless, disoriented, and this guy found him on the streets and brought him in, saved him. And then he looked at me and he said, so what do you do? Well, I write on Facebook. I didn't say anything. I just sat there. And then the gentleman who had organized this entire thing came in and sat down, and we were talking about his work, and I said, how do you do this? Like, you have no resources. You have no money. Like, all your money is gone. There are like these hundreds of people pouring in constantly. You're trying to feed all of them. How are you going to do this? And he said, it's all about knowing who you are and what your purpose is and coming back to that. And that takes only one single word. What is that? Commitment. If you're committed to who you are, no matter what changes come, no matter how upside down things get, you will adjust to the flow. I mean, you'll get your cloud score, you'll get your SEO, you'll get all of that, but then you come back to your center and say, this is who I am and this is what my purpose is. I went back, found the obituary. I'm a storyteller. I like to tell stories through food. I like to nurture. I wanted to come back to that. And the one thing that I learned through all this change and all the stuff happening is that you can't control publications. They will come and go. You can't control people's opinions or attitudes. I was first, Monica is the engineer, Monica is the hobby writer, Monica is the Indian woman food writer, Monica is the Indian woman columnist for the Washington Post. Oh, Monica is the fiction writer. No. Writer. I'm just a writer. That's all I've ever wanted to be. But everybody likes to label. All these changes will come at you, but you got to go back to your true center. In the last 2 years, after coming back from visiting that gentleman, I went back. What did I really want to write? 10 years ago, when I first quit my job, I wrote a collection of short stories. First thing, short stories don't sell. This doesn't sell, that doesn't sell. But I'm not listening to that change. It's out. It hit Amazon bestseller the week it came out. But that's because you go back and say, I'm going to fight this on my terms. Other things are changing, but I'm going to do what I need to do. So now I'm a writer. I'm a hybrid writer. I have 3 books with publishers. I have some of my own. You can do this. The magic word, like I said, stay committed to who you are. And anytime there's this fork in the road, you're wondering what to do, everything's changing, just sort of go back to the center and say, where to next? And I can do this. I'll leave you with one small example, and then I'm done talking. I was telling Andrew this last night. I have a friend who is a brilliant writer. She's written, what she said to me is, I've written 1 million words, right? She's written stories about healthcare, marketing, food, travel, everything. Good success, but it was never in the name was never up in any kind of highlights or bestseller list. And she got a divorce from her husband. In order to express how she was feeling, she created a little pendant that said, fuck this shit. Guess whose name is up in the highlight now from a pendant that sold out in 2 days? She said, I wrote 1 million words, and these are the 3 words that made my career. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Weren't they just fantastic? Thank you for sharing your stories, both of you, with us. I just think that that's just such a great way to kick off a conference, to hear about each other's journeys. So thank you. So I'm going to ask you a couple of quick questions, if you don't mind. So if you had to do it all over again, what would you do different this time? And I'll start with you, Andrew.
I'm self-censoring right now. I'm gonna have to think about that for 2 seconds. You go. I'm gonna
I got an easy answer for that one. I think I'd try to figure out what the hell I was trying to do before I quit my job. It's like I quit my job and then I came home and I'm like looking through Oprah magazines trying to figure out what the hell happened. Oh, that's what I wanted to tell you before I ended. Remember that Oprah thing that completely crashed? Last year, I got my picture on a magazine cover and they ran that same picture that the Oprah magazine killed. So 6 years later, still there. But yeah, you have to have some definition of who you are, what you're going to do. It's going to change, but there's got to be some blueprint, because otherwise it's like I don't know where to go. Which door should I open now? And that's hard.
I can totally relate to that.
Okay, so I'm not sure yet what I would change because I haven't connected all the dots.
Really?
That's the honest answer is I feel like I'm on a good path. I haven't figured out what it is. I'm at the point where I've had so many doorways in front of me that I keep running through them as fast as I can. And that's what this whole transition out of lighting into blogging and whatever it is I'm doing now has been, is all these crazy paths in front of me and I'm gonna take them all. And I actually am at the point right about now where I need to figure out which doors to close. Because I'm a little spread too thin. So at the moment, my challenge, I guess, the thing I need to change is to figure out which, narrow my focus a little bit. So.
Very interesting. So I'd love to hear a little bit. How do you feel about social media? We hear so many mixed things. Love it, hate it. It has ruined everything. It's ruined publishing. So I'd love to hear, what is your take on it?
I love it. I hate it. I'll say that I'm pretty burned out on social media, and I think it goes in cycles. Who's burned out on social media? Let's be honest. Okay, and who is like totally enamored with social media? One hand. 2 hands. Okay. I will say this. It goes in waves, and you have to make peace with that. It's okay. There's this should. I should be doing everything. I have to be on Twitter. I have to be on Facebook. I have to be on Instagram. I have to be. There's something new popping up every day, and you can't do it all. You're just going to burn out. And so it's some of trying what works, but. I will say social media has changed my life in immeasurable ways. October Unprocessed never would have happened had we not been tweeting with the unprocessed hashtag, where the New York Times saw it and picked it up, and then the LA Times picked it up. So Twitter has changed my life. That's just one example. And blogging has changed my life. It very recently saved my dog's life. She's sick, and I did a blog post about her, and from the reader feedback I got, it got us to the right doctor who got us to the right food, to the right thing, and there's this whole chain of events that she'd be dead right now if I didn't do that blog post. So I remind myself of those moments when I'm burned out, and then I sit down and write.
Excellent.
No, I agree with what he said. It's very difficult. It's a very much, like most people, a love-hate relationship. When my husband first said I needed to get on Facebook, I'm like, what am I going to write about? Like, who cares what I'm eating, what I'm doing? And he's like, just start. So I've made some great friends. I've met some amazing people. I think the beauty of social media is that you get to talk to people you normally would not run into. My best social media story is that there was a woman writing on social media about getting lost in Morocco. And of course, me and my smart-ass answers, I'm like, isn't getting lost the best part for a writer? And she wrote back and she said, why, yes, it is. And I'm telling my husband the story at dinner. And then Susan Orlean said this. And he goes, who? Did you hear what she's a lead writer for The New Yorker for 25 years. And I'm telling her about getting lost is the best thing to do. But then I had dinner with her. We met and we became friends. So it's opened a lot of doors. I've met a lot of wonderful people, but it is really overwhelming. A friend of mine had a book coming out and said, listen, can you do a little social media giveaway for me? I did. We got about 15 responses, and then one of her bigger blogger friends did it. They got about 50,000 responses. So you're like, there's no there. You got to sort of adjust with where you are. It can take a lot out of you otherwise.
So tell me, Twitter or Facebook?
Instagram, because I'm not on Instagram.
Andrew?
Facebook.
Facebook.
Really?
Facebook.
Well, it depends what your goal is. Twitter is great for conversations. It's horrible for marketing. So if you want to meet a new writer, if you have a grammar question and you want to find out if it's farmer apostrophe S market or farmer's S, where the apostrophe goes, you ask that question and suddenly the food writer for the New York Times writes back with his answer. You have access in Twitter. But if you want to drive traffic to your website, you do a new blog post, you post it on Twitter. The half-life of a tweet, I think, is 40 seconds or something ridiculous. So it depends on your goal. But I think from a marketing promotion standpoint, I think Facebook is still the king.
Very interesting. Pinterest or Instagram?
Instagram.
Pinterest. No, I'm serious. I like Pinterest. The way I've been using Pinterest is a little different than most people who use it, because I know people are doing a lot of recipe posts. I've been using it as a place for charting out my fiction work. So when I work with an editor, we've got scenes of every single scene in the book, photographs that we've stolen from all over the net. So this is what it's going to look like, and it's amazing to bring something to life. It's like creating a prototype of a book online. It's wonderful.
I should clarify my answer. It depends on what you want to get out of it. I think if you want to drive traffic to your site, Pinterest is totally the way to go. If you want to have fun, for me personally, I enjoy using Instagram, and so that's why I've been going to it.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed them as much as I have. They're just wonderful.
Thank you.